Chad Harris, it has been forever since I have seen you. How are you?
I'm doing awesome and doubly so now that we're live because I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this talk.
Yay! Yeah, it's always a good time hanging out with you. I always appreciate your willingness to just hop in and just be down for anything. So I appreciate you. I appreciate people who are viewing right now. So, Chad, tell us a little bit about yourself for anybody who's watching. Maybe they aren't familiar. Who are you? What do you do? What are you all about?
Those are all really good questions that I'm still learning every day. I am Chad Harris. I was raised in a independent fundamental Baptist church, and of course the IBLP Institute in Basic Life Principles cult that everyone saw in Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go into the slideshow. But basically, I was raised in fundamentalism, and now I am very much an atheist and proud of
Yay!
it. So,
Yay! Absolutely. I feel like
yeah.
it's such a shift being an atheist and like finding out other people are atheists and being like, oh, yay. When there was a time in my life, I would have been like, oh, so I never get to talk to those people again. You know, it's kind of like the first time you smoke weed and then you're nice to weed people after that, even though before you were like, weed's bad people. That was a weird tangent. Anyway, so you have a presentation for us and I'm
I
excited to
do.
see it. And I'm going to give you the floor. Do you have the option to bring it into the main room or do I have to do that on my end? Add
Let
to
me
stage.
see, actually. Yeah, I think you might have to do that.
Perfect. So I'm going to add it to stage and I'm just going to let you go from here.
Okay. All right, then. To start with, in the Broadway play The Music Man, a con man known as Professor Harold Hill makes his way to the quiet town of River City, Iowa, in 1912, where all the citizens live a quiet, uneventful life. Hill's scheme involves selling instruments and uniforms for a marching band, then leaving town once paid. In order to convince the town that they need a band, Hill confides in an old retired con artist friend that he needs to find a problem in River City. His friend says that River City has no problems. In surveying the town square, Hill sees a billiard hall with a crowd gathered around it. He learns that the billiard hall has just gotten its first pocketed pool table after years of only having pocketless billiard tables. Seizing the opportunity to create a problem, Hill approaches the owner of a neighboring shop and says, "Friend, either you're closing your eyes to a situation you do not wish to acknowledge, or you are not aware of the caliber of disaster indicated by the presence of a pool table in your community." From there, the play launches into one of its most famous songs, "Ya Got Trouble." In rapid patter, Hill acknowledges that while billiards, in his view, helps you cultivate horse sense and a cool head and a keen eye, pool encourages laziness. Or in his words, "But just as I say it takes judgment, brains, and maturity to score in a ballplaying game, I say any boob can take and shove a ball in a pocket. And I call that sloth the first big step on the road to the depths of degradation. I say, first medicinal wine from a teaspoon, then beer from a bottle." Hill goes on to describe the various trouble that will come from the alleged sloth encouraged by the game of pool. He focuses on the young boys in particular who are fascinated by the new table, saying they'll be frittering away their noontime, supper time, chore time too. Despite the parents being the right kind of parents, as he says in his song, their children will be tempted to try smoking and dancing to ragtime music, leading to moral collapse.
No.
Or as he puts it, trouble with a capital T and that rhymes with P and that stands for pool. And of course, he happens to have the remedy to this particular trouble, namely creating a boys' marching band with the products that he has to sell. Now, fast forward to 1964. A young man known as Bill Gothard is invited by Wheaton College to teach a class on what he calls basic youth conflicts, and his experience in dealing with troubled teenagers. The following year, he would begin taking his class on the road as a seminar. The Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts was born, which would later change its name to reflect the 7 non-optional principles that the seminar taught. And thus the Institute in Basic Life Principles was born, which would eventually become a fundamentalist Christian cult whose influences have had an immeasurable impact on evangelical Christianity worldwide. 2 salesmen, 1 fictional, 1 real life, both with a focus and a pitch revolving around the morality of youth. Both successful in stirring up crowds of people to buy their product to prevent moral decay. Is that all these 2 con men have in common? I think they're more alike in their approach than one would think. And that's why today's talk is entitled, "How to Spot a Cult, the Musical." Don't worry, I personally will not sing. but you've heard pretty much everything you need to understand the concept going forward. If you would like to watch the song "You Got Trouble," you can find it on the internet. YouTube won't let us play it here. All right. So to start with, as I said in the intro, my name is Chad Harris. I was raised as a fundamentalist youth under the Institute and Basic Life Principles cult that I mentioned earlier. As a matter of fact, there is a lovely photo of me with my pseudo military haircut, my 1950s suit style, in an old feed store church with the wood paneling that was so popular back in the previous century. God, I'm old.
How does that look like 1960 and 2005 at the same time?
You know what? I feel like 2005 just kind of really like 1960. At least we did in fundamentalism.
Yeah.
Well, for there, after a long and complicated series of events, I did eventually break out of my cult mentality, and I kind of lived quietly, just kind of deconstructing my own beliefs before that was even a term. Became an atheist at, back in 2016 was when I publicly came out as an atheist. And
Wow.
I still kind of kept quiet, just kind of complaining to my inner circle about, what I saw as the cult's growing influence in society until in 2020, where I decided to start speaking a little bit more about it. After my dad died, I was encouraged by my counselor to find a way to perform my story. And
Interesting.
I, in 2020, we didn't have venues for that. So I decided to use this little app that people just kept watching dances on, and for like 60 seconds. I said, I can cut my story up into 60 seconds. And I started doing that on TikTok.
Wow. It's
And
wild to me that there was ever a Chad that did not do what I know you to do. Like, ever since I've known you, you've just been this outspoken person on the matter, and it boggles my mind that you were ever not this person.
yeah, I've always been the sort that loves to be up on stage in front of people, loves to talk to folks. I'm an extrovert, sextrovert, never met a stranger, but I really didn't start speaking out about my experiences until this time. And only then, to be perfectly honest, 60 seconds a pop, you can't really rabbit trail that much. So
That's true.
this
That's
kept helped
true.
me keep it succinct. From there, I surprisingly got a pretty good following and
I'd
met
say.
some really good friends on TikTok as well who had also had similar experiences. And along with them, I was asked to participate in Shiny Happy People Duggar Family Secrets in
Yes.
2023 is when it was released. Trust me, we were working on it long before that. But yes, that finally released in 2023, where pretty much everyone who had an Amazon Prime account or had a friend who did found out about our upbringing in the Institute and Basic Life Principles.
Yes.
So,
And I remember the day that I first met you and you were like, "Yeah, I'm on this project coming out. I can't really say much about it." And then boom, you were everywhere and I was like, "No way. This is so cool."
yes, shout out to the producers for putting me like first thing in the trailer, and I was like, well, there goes anonymity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oops. But anyway, that has been an amazing experience. I'm glad that more people have heard about IBLP, and we're going to hear about it a little bit more tonight. I say all this to say that while I'm hardly the authority on cults, I can talk about the cult that I was raised in and what I see as similarities between my cult and fundamentalist cults that exist throughout the country, as well as some of the little nuances that I saw in the song You Got Trouble. One of the things I want to point out were similar to Professor Harold Hill and the alleged Dr. Bill Gothard
Alleged.
was how they operated. And we'll start with that one: enthusiasm and confidence. So, cult recruiters and salespeople both present excitement and professionalism whenever they're going out trying to sell their lifestyle or their product. As you may see in this totally AI generated image of a couple of young men that you may have had experience with in your own life, knocking on your door, telling you about how Jesus came here to America. And that look is very deliberate. It's that clean cut professional look with a smiling face that I myself, even as a non-member of the LDS church, also participated in, knocking on doors, letting folks know about our church. And this was how we were taught to do it too. Professional look, bright smiles, enthusiasm about what we were doing.
And also what I think is extra weird about it is it's a great way to strip away your individuality, but instead
Exactly.
they're praising you for fitting in without hoping you won't realize that, which is so spooky in hindsight, to be honest.
Well, and also this is a byproduct of the people they recruit to be in the cult. So the more that they can strip away that individuality, and the more they can present that united front and that united look, and the more kudos they give you for doing so, the more they expose people who go out into the world to the hostilities of the world and make the cult seem safer by comparison. So it's a double-edged sword. It brings more people in, but it also keeps the people who are doing this in the high controlling group. Which brings me to the next point. Attractiveness, grooming, professionalism, and charisma are used as tools. Some of you may have seen this young gentleman on the TikToks lately. This would be a Church of Scientology recruiter.
Oof.
Known as Sebastian, who has become a bit of a meme on TikTok of late with the Free Sebastian movement. The striking looks and the professionalism and the always cheery attitude, again, very, very indicative of the sales tactics that cults use. Again, show that Professor Harold Hill immediately comes in with like rapid patter, ingratiates himself, becomes the saleskeeper's or the shopkeeper's friend immediately. That's what these cults are attempting to do when they recruit and when they try to bring people in.
So you're saying if I see an Olive Garden waiter and I am not in an Olive Garden, that's a cult.
That may well be, but they all come in different uniforms, in different outlooks, shapes, sizes, and what have you. But they all will be enthusiastic, and they all will immediately go into their pitch. And if the sale is on the seller's turf or the cult's turf, they will dress the environment accordingly. And this is a clip from Shiny Happy People. This was how things were decorated in our particular cult. There were always regal red carpets everywhere. There were potted plants. There was mahogany as much as they could. Whenever we would go into a building to hold a seminar, everything would be just pristine and decorated to the nth degree to make people feel special for coming in. Coming out of the dirty exterior, like for example, if we held a conference at the University of Tennessee campus, people would be coming from outside a stadium, where there were bleachers and there was, shuttered concession stands and stuff like that, into this welcoming environment of just, pure beauty and professionalism. So it's all about the appearance, the enthusiasm, the willingness to sell their product. The goal is to create confidence. So, of course, con man, meaning confidence man, Professor Harold Hill, in his whole demeanor, in his approach, in positioning himself as a distinguished billiard player who's proud to say it, he is creating confidence in the people who are familiar with the trappings of what he presents as success and richness. Now, enthusiasm was a core component of what my cult, IVLP, taught. There were 49 character qualities that IVLP taught, each with their own operational definition. And by operational definition, I mean they took all these character qualities like alertness, meekness, generosity, and everything, and they just redefined them to benefit the cult. Enthusiasm was one such word. They defined enthusiasm as expressing with my spirit the joy of my soul. We were taught that true enthusiasm meant that we would take all these teachings that we were learning and just be so darn excited to share them with everybody that we just couldn't help but in our daily life, whatever we were doing, just express that enthusiasm. And that was a tactic to get people to look into what we were doing and join up the cult.
I did not think it was possible to make enthusiasm less appealing. Like, enthusiasm is such a great word. I never realized I could be totally turned off from it, but you got me. You proved me wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is a little freebie too. If the group you're in decides to redefine words to benefit themselves and, thus make it less appealing to people who know better and such, maybe that's a pretty good indication that, you're in something that's trying to control you.
Yeah, words don't mean what they really mean. They mean what we say they mean. And you're like, oh, that makes sense, I guess.
Further proof of how enthusiasm was used to keep us in line and to keep us recruiting. was found in the summary notes for one of our wisdom booklets, and wisdom booklets were our homeschool curriculum that we used. Wisdom booklet 40, whose theme was serving, reveals our first love. And it's a little bit hard to see, but you can actually see the definition of enthusiasm right over here on the left hand side, the same one we just saw in that big chart. It was the focus for this wisdom booklet, which had to do with service, which had to do with, putting out our teachings into the world. So enthusiasm in a high controlling group and cult is always used in relationship to service to that cult.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I think Hollywood has convinced us that cults are like aggressive and angry and forceful, when really they're often pleasant and agreeable and attractive. It's such an interesting dynamic.
Exactly. Like, not everything is, like you said, Hollywood has to show a clear bad guy. So they're going to
Yeah.
show that aggression. They're going to show, the insidiousness and severity, to the audience. But to anyone just walking down the street and meeting one of these people that's, trying to recruit you, they're not going to show that at all. Why would you go with someone who's up in your face and, telling you you're going to hell?
Yeah.
A real cult and everything that's trying to attract you will be a lot more pleasant about it and enthusiastic.
Yeah.
So all this is in service of getting to the core of what both Professor Harold Hill and the cult uses as a bludgeon to try to get you in, which is showing people what they want. And I use that as a double-edged term there. You're not only showing people what they want, as in something they already knew they wanted, but you're also showing people what they want. You're also controlling the narrative to try to shape what they might not even realize at the time that they needed in their life, or were supposed to be scared of in their life. When Professor Harold Hill comes up to the shopkeeper, he tells him, he's like, "You don't know the danger that's in your community because you have a pool table." The guy wasn't thinking about that, but Harold Hill comes up and starts telling him, "Hey, you're going to face disaster if you don't pay attention to this thing." And starts to shape what that man wants. The book How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling was written by Frank Bettger and is considered one of the best books on how to become a salesperson. He states in the book, when you show a man what he wants, he will move heaven and earth to get it. Cults tend to focus on presenting something attractive that the people they are talking to want out of life. So, people who want cults, who join cults, typically want one of three things. And this was put out there by Rachel Bernstein, who's a marriage and family counselor and the host of the Indoctrination podcast, which I had the pleasure to speak on.
Wow.
In a Business Insider article, she states that cults typically offer three things to people for what they're looking for. People typically want to better themselves either professionally or personally, which is something that we saw with the Nexium cult that recently made the headlines and, of course, had their own documentary. Or people want a greater sense of community. Speaking, of course, about the Heaven's Gate cult. People who are typically outsiders in society or people who are otherwise marginalized, wanting to find like-minded people.
Yeah.
And then finally, of course, people who are in a state of extreme vulnerability. And of course, I refer to Narconon, which is a branch of the Church of Scientology. One of their branches to try to teach people how to recover from their addictions without actually trusting in science. Speaking of which, we actually had that in the cult I was raised in as well, affiliated with IBLP. And definitely part of the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church was a group called Reformers Unanimous, which used scriptural principles, not 12 steps exactly,
Right.
but they used principles to try to help people with whatever addiction they had, be it drugs, be it anything else. One Josh Duggar actually went to the residential version of that.
Is that where he went?
Yep.
Is that where he went? Oh my gosh.
One of those places. One of those times, yes. Later on in life when he was an adult, after the Ashley Madison thing. So, yeah, and as you can see, of course, it didn't work. But, but these But people who join cults are usually looking for one of these three things, and cults are happy to align themselves with those wants and needs.
Right.
I'm going to focus primarily on number three, people being in a state of extreme vulnerability, because I feel it best jives with what we're talking about with Hill's approach, which I believe IDLP uses quite a bit as well.
That's the
But
saddest one, the vulnerability aspect. That's
but
so sad.
also, oh, it is, and it is absolutely predatory, and it and what's insidious about it too is that you can take someone who is perfectly happy with life, and you can introduce a fear to them, which we'll get to in just a minute. But you can introduce something that will make them afraid in order to put them in that state of vulnerability. So, for example, in our opener, we talked about how the partner of Professor Hill said, River City ain't in any trouble. And Hill says, well, we're going to have to create some.
Uh,
By the same token, Bill Gothard, as you can pretty much see here on his little chalkboard in the background, has all these scary sounding words like ungratefulness, stubbornness, rebellion, nagging, deprivation, and stuff like that on his little blackboard, at which he would eventually move on to PowerPoint presentations and what have you. People who use this tactic of creating vulnerability and creating fear will typically use all these, horrible sounding words and try to get people who are comfortable out of their comfort zone. Keep in mind, Bill Gothard's primary focus was on people who are already Christian. It wasn't so much of an evangelical cult as it was people who were living a normal Christian life, but he had to come in and tell them that they were doing it wrong. They needed to do it in a different way in order to keep these ills of society from happening to them and their youth, which is why his initial foray into cults was called the Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts. He
Man.
founded this cult when, in a time of upheaval in society, during the sexual revolution, civil rights, Vietnam, and everything else going on. And he said he had the answer for all the conflicts in society, namely his 7 non-optional principles. So showing people what they want and making them uncomfortable in their comfort. One way that they do this is asking questions like Hill does in his song. At one point, he turns to the audience and asks them, the minute your son leaves the house, does he rebuckle his knickerbockers below the knee? Is there a nicotine stain on his index finger? A dime novel hidden in the corn crib? Is he starting to memorize jokes from Captain Billy's Whiz Bang? And are certain words creeping into his conversation? Words like swell and so's your old man. Now, in our modern parlance, from when this play was written, it was about 40 years after the time it was set in. By our modern standards, this would be like the salesman saying, are your kids glued to their Ataris? Are they wearing Jenko jeans? Are they using words like groovy and bogus and tubular?
Tubular.
Things that youth have been doing for centuries, and eras foretold. Kids are always going to be doing their own vernaculars. They're always going to be pushing the boundaries of their development and trying out things that they see older folks try. So in the song, he uses very human behavior and uses rhetorical questions. And so's your old man, right? He uses rhetorical questions to try to invoke that fear and to make people uncomfortable and take the alien to the older generation and make it seem abnormal.
Yeah, I
It's the
also
same.
like how
Go
he
ahead.
is taking totally normal teenage behaviors and being like,
Mhm.
"See? That's a
Yep.
sign. There you go." That would be like me saying, "You should join my church." And someone's like, "No." And I'm like, "Is your teenage son talking back?" And they're like, "Oh my god, yeah." And you're like, "Yeah." And I bet he's using like TikTok words, right? And it's just
Mhm.
teenagers. But,
Yep. And
yeah.
that was exactly how Bill Gothard, got his start with youth conflicts. The conflicts were basically just youth in a turbulent time, feeling out who they were. That was it,
So's your old man. I feel like that's today's your mom. It
pretty
just occurred to
much.
me. I'm like, "Oh, we still have one of those. It's just your mom."
Over 100 years, and it's still going strong.
That's funny.
So the Church of Scientology uses a version of this tactic, personality testing. They'll offer you a free personality test, which is hundreds of questions long, as you can see in the image there. People have taken pictures of it. It's just hundreds and hundreds of questions. Some of them are very, like strikingly personal. And of course, these are all questions that the cult has already anticipated the answer to. No matter how you answer it, you're going to get a pitch from them. Weirdly enough, IBLP did the same thing. Just
Wow.
about every resource they ever put out had a question and answer section at the very beginning of it. On the left over here, you can see one talking about your understanding of marriage, and on the right, you can see it. You can see a sheet talking about your understanding of financial freedom. Both of these are resources that were in addition to the homeschooling curriculum I was raised in. In all those wisdom booklets, like I showed you earlier, they all started with this same kind of quiz, trying to tell you, or express to you like how ignorant you were about a particular topic. And they did so, for example, with the marriage questionnaire. They would ask very innocent sounding questions like, why do ushers seat the families and friends of the bride and groom on opposite sides of the auditorium? Answers: A, to sit with those who they know. B, to show who they support. C, to symbolize uniting two families. D, to see who has more friends. Or E, none of the above. Like, there were a couple in there that were obviously thrown in as kind of like, slightly humorous, but all these questions, challenged people's beliefs about what they thought they already knew about marriage, for example. Why does the groom enter the auditorium before the bride? A, to show he initiated the marriage. B, to officially begin the ceremony. C, to greet the bride. Or D, none of the above. So,
What's the answer to these? What's like the official answer?
The official answer to number 4, as I recall correctly, was A, to show he initiated the marriage.
Oh,
so
okay.
in Gothar's world, the reason the groom would do this would be to show that he was the one who initially started the courtship and the true biblical marriage and established himself as the head of this marriage by being first.
Just in case you thought she asked me out, I asked her out. So
exactly.
Just get it straight.
Well, likewise, with the financial freedom seminar that they had, the very first questionnaire they had questions that were designed to kind of put you ill at ease. Like the very first question: this morning, did you consciously ask God for the things you would need to get you through the day? Well, of course, no one does that every single day, so very likely a lot of people would say no. Let's see. There was a question on here about do you tithe 10% of everything you make? Well, some people do, some people don't. But especially at the time that this seminar was going around, that a lot of people didn't. So, these are all questions that promote the sense of authority. They're all in like these very professionally done, professionally printed questionnaires, and they use all those tactics to promote confidence. But what's happening is they're answering questions that asking questions that they already know the answer to or the preferred answer to. And after you're done and you tally up your knowledge, for example, on the marriage one, either you understand the significance of weddings, or your understanding is above average, or you have many exciting things to learn, or you're the victim of meaningless traditions.
Whoa! Whoa! That last one. What?
Right?
Or you're the victim of meaningless traditions.
Exactly.
Jeez.
And it's there to make you feel less than if you got some of them wrong. On the financial freedom one, it's a little bit more harsh. If you got all of them correct, you were in financial freedom. If you got even one of them wrong by their standards, you're in financial danger. If you got 14 to 10 correct, you're in financial confusion, and 9 to 0 financial bondage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So everybody's getting them wrong on purpose because they're like, oh, bondage. What's that?
I mean, some might be into it.
Hey.
Financial bondage is a thing.
I don't judge.
So, but all this, is the same, has the same premise and leads to the same place that Professor Harold Hill went to in his song, "Ya Got Trouble." No matter what you do, like no one's going to get everything absolutely correct. No matter what you do, you need the products that you're in danger. You need what we have for you. And that is Act 3, arousing fear. Fear
Wow.
is a big motivator. Even if you're innocently selling something, you do want to create FOMO. You want to create the fear of missing out if you don't get something. So, one way to promote fear is to explode dynamite. Yes, most religious people are the victims of meaningless traditions. But you see, Bill Gothard realized that, and especially in the marriage one, he put that in there so that he could promote the idea that he had the real answer to how to make these traditions meaningful.
Jeez.
Exploding dynamite is the concept of once you have people's attention and you have their confidence in you, then you can make outlandish statements, very strong, pointed statements that grab their attention and arouse that fear because you already have them listening to you. So, in the financial freedom seminar that I referenced earlier, they had this lovely story about the consequences of robbing God as a quick aside in the middle of their talking about how you should trust God with money and shit. The story goes: a farmer received a $100,000 profit on the sale of some land. He was encouraged to give a tithe to his church, but he decided not to. Shortly thereafter, he was burning some brush on the back of his property. A strong wind came and blew the fire over the fence and onto his neighbor's field. The neighbor sued for damages. The total cost for the farmer was $10,000. You will notice that at no point is this farmer identified. At no point is a source given for this story. It just talks about a farmer, his field, and an act of God that just so happened to correspond with the 10% that he never gave back to God.
Right. I love that the answer, like, or the lesson here is, oh, you don't want to give it? Looks like I just got to take it then. Like,
Exactly.
I feel like that is the message. Pretty clearly.
This was actually something that was taught to us in the cult.
And like,
If
it
you,
seemed okay. It seemed like, oh, makes sense because you got to pay.
my dad in particular said that if you fail to tithe, you were robbing God and you would fall under God's curse. And
Jeez.
stories like this, unsourced and apocryphal though they were used to promote that idea.
Now, real question. If
Mhm.
you then tithe the next week, are you still considered under God's curse? Like, is that like you get one chance, or can you buy your way out of it?
You can buy your way out of it if you tithe twice as much the next week,
Jeez.
right?
Oh, it's
Make
so
up for what you miss.
sinister. Gosh.
In the marriage, questionnaire I referenced earlier, I misidentified as the men's manual. Sorry about that. It was actually the uh, covenant marriage pamphlet that had the questionnaire. They had this story at the very end talking about how, in order to have a truly fruitful and meaningful marriage, you needed to commit yourself to the quiverful movement. The
Oh
story
boy.
goes by the apocryphal person writing this. When I was 25 years old, I got married, and for some undefined reason, I rejected for 7 years the suggestion that we have children. I thought I had valid reasons, but no one had ever talked to me about it. I had received no counsel or teaching from either family, friends, or church. No one seemed to consider it to be a critical issue. In addition, the world had all kind of new medical methods for preventing pregnancy. As I look back, I don't remember hearing one dissenting voice. Down deep, I always knew I wanted children someday. I didn't really want to be childless all of my life, and eventually I decided that I wanted 5 children. So after several years of some very difficult decision making, we had our first child, a girl. And to my great amazement, I found out I actually liked having children. Having a child is one of the greatest things that happen in our lives. Now, scrolling down just a little bit for time's sake, my wife and I have just been told that it now looks medically impossible for us to have any more children. Suddenly, all of our newly established family dreams have been erased. All the excitement and anticipation of a newly discovered future have vanished. It seems as though there is a void in our lives. Like 4 of our 5 children have just been killed.
Uh, okay. First of all, let's unpack this for a second. First of all,
Yes.
they're like, one, she was old as fuck when she got married, so don't do that. Two, I love how her undefined reasons, I don't know, your thoughts and opinions and your feelings for not wanting to
Mhm.
have kids. So the first, like, she was ancient. She was wrong about how she felt about it. We don't even know why she felt that way. She just did. Then they said after how did they put it? They said like after there was like a term they used, it was basically like a struggle and like a really difficult conversation. So basically, after her husband told her
Yep.
that's what she wanted and she just agreed, and then she gave birth to her child. And wow, I liked it. I liked the kid after I gave birth. That's so. That's so messed up on
Mhm.
so many levels.
But it's all part of this idea that, if you don't do everything exactly as we tell you to do right now, you will find yourself in this situation of loss. And understand, this isn't like loss. This is like, someone grieving, an ideal and everything, which unfortunately, life was not going to give to them. But it's this whole, like 4 of our 5 children have just been killed. Like that is a horrible, like, you know sad way of expressing, the death of your dream, but also to blame yourself for not following, these teachings that God had put
Man,
out there.
if only she had just wanted to have that many kids from day one, this wouldn't have happened. But because she had thoughts and feelings, this is what happens when you have thoughts and feelings.
Exactly.
Ew.
Finally, one of the more famous examples that was talked about in Shiny Happy People, how the exit of trolls and dolls was followed by the entrance of babies. And this is from a medical bulletin IBLP put out in the 90s. Let's see. We're hearing wonderful reports of more and more couples who have chosen to have their children born at home using the services of a midwife. Scrolling down, at one birth, the moms had been in labor for 2 or 3 days with no signs of problems for the mother or baby, but no progress. This was baby number 5. The Lord prompted me to ask them about any items in their home through which Satan could gain entrance to interfere. There was a Cabbage Patch doll
No,
in their home. They threw it outside and agreed to burn it when they could get a fire going. Within 2 hours, the mom had a beautiful son.
or maybe you stressed her out to the point where she just was like, you know what? I want these crazy psychos out of my house. I'm just going to get this baby out of here.
Yep.
Also, I love how they're
Let's
like in labor for 2 or 3 days with no issues. I'm like, did you ask the mom? Because that sounds like an issue to me. I don't want to be in labor for 2 to 3 days.
right. In the home of another born again Christian couple, there was a similar situation, only with a rebellious daughter and lots of trolls. In addition, oh, yeah, and lots of trolls in addition. The mom was not dilating well. Again, the Lord burdened me to approach this couple about what they had in their home that might allow demonic influence. I had seen one troll doll in their bathroom. They agreed to get rid of any they had. The dad collected a grocery sack full. Out went the trolls. The family had their first successful home birth that morning after having attempted one years before.
And I think what they're also saying is because they didn't home birth the first daughter, that's why she was such a rebel.
Yep,
That's what
absolutely.
this is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, but it's effective because at
Right.
this point they already have people bought in. They've answered the questions. They're going through, this whole explanation of how you need to Jesus better. And in the middle of it, they stick these striking things, that like, oh, well, I never considered that, not tithing was making me suck at finances, or I never considered having a damn troll doll in the 80s and 90s because that's what we did
Right,
was
right, and that's
causing the
smart
devil.
too. That's
Mhm.
another smart thing too, is they picked something really popular that you're going to have in your home if you have kids. They're like, "Oh, Troll Doll, Cabbage Patch Kids, Polly Pocket," and parents are like, "Oh my god, we do. Oh my god," and it's like, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing.
Does your child have a copy of Captain Billy's Whiz Bang in the corn crib?
Does your
Yep.
child like Dr. Seuss? Oh god. Oh no.
Yep. So after you have gained their confidence and after you have approached with enthusiasm and after you have created all this fear, the next act is to assume a close on the part of the cult. At that point, they've got you where they want you. In the book Counting the Cost by Jill Duggar Dillard, she talks about how each seminar in IBLP would end for a call for people to raise their hands as a sign that they were pledging to follow whatever IBLP principle had just been explained. I felt the pressure to prove my dedication to God, so it never took long before my hand was up in the air. She was a child at this point.
Right. Right.
But in this big seminar full of people, after you've just had all these things thrown at you, after you've answered all these questions, after you've had all these normal things told to you were, creating conflict in your home, after you were told that your understanding wasn't good enough, and they've given you the answer, then they force you right then and there to make a decision, assuming that you're going to do it. With peer
Right.
pressure and everything, you have no choice but to do so, even if you're a child.
Right, and the saddest part about this is because they taught the quiverful lifestyle, These are likely children who are one of a dozen. They don't get enough attention already. They don't get enough one on one time with their parents. And the one way they know that they can get their parents to like them or to notice them for a moment is to raise their hands in these moments or to say the
Exactly.
key words or to get the lesson perfect. And so not only do they just not probably even understand what it is they're agreeing to, but they're doing it because they want the adults who don't have the time for them that they deserve as the kids to notice them and to give them any kind of attention or praise whatsoever. It's so sad.
Absolutely. And again, that's getting to what the children want. Again, showing people what they want, showing the kids that, this is how you can get your parents' approval, by going
Right.
along with what we're saying. Absolutely. It's all part of the plan. Again, Harold Hill talking about how we got to figure out a way to keep the young ones moral after school, rather than letting them be lured by the pockets on a billiard table, or by joke books, or by ragtime music. He, of course, had the answer, which was a bunch of band equipment and uniforms that he had no intention of teaching people how to use. Cults do this too. Once you have bought into their free introduction, they always have a product to sell, whether or not it be a book talking about yes, Gothard needs to be slapped 100%. Like the Dianetics book that they'll have you buy after you take this free quiz, or after you see a free movie about L. Ron Hubbard. They'll have this book ready for you to purchase. Or you might find yourself being sold a nice little commune in Guyana where absolutely nothing terrible happened ever at Jonestown. A community where you can just be with like-minded people outside of the world that's scaring you so much. Or you could just be sold a whole bunch of principles that will make your kids fall in line and make you have a happy, healthy family where nothing terrible happens ever.
Oh gosh.
Bill Gothard had a program for just about everything. It wasn't just the homeschooling. It wasn't just the seminars themselves.
Bill
As he
Gothard, who
himself
never
said.
got married and never had kids, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah.
Yep, but somehow he had programs for your family and your
All
kids,
the answers.
like the family conferences, Journey to the Heart, Alert Cadet, Quest, Rise Up, Excel, Sound Foundations, not to mention all these sermons that you could either buy on VHS, DVD, or stream from their website, or all these books that were personally endorsed by him that would make your family and super Christians and give you the harmony and the instant obedience you always craved. There is always a product, and there is always something to keep you spending your resources to gain this unachievable sense of perfection that the cult tells you that you need.
Wild.
So at the end of both of these stories, after all the fear, after all the sales, how did they end up? Well, naturally, in the story of Harold Hill, through the power of love and some other contrivances, he actually ends up deciding to stay and, leading a band that just somehow materializes through the machinations of a musical. Guys, it's a funny story, okay? And spoilers for a 6-year-old movie, but it's actually kind of cute. Real life con men, yeah, not so much. Bill Gothard is now no longer the head of IBLP, but he is still pushing out his grifts to anyone who will still pay him money. After being forced to voluntarily resign after sexual harassment claims from several of the young women who work for him for either free or very meager wages at his compound in Chicago, he now runs a website where he teaches people, I shit you not, how to earn a PhD degree while you sleep.
How is that even possible?
It's not, but
Who's
he still sells
buying
it.
these things? Who buys these? He's not
People,
accredited. You're not going to tell me that's a real PhD.
well, he still uses the same principles that we just talked about, showing people what they want. You want a PhD? Here's how you get it. And here's the best way to get it. Otherwise, you're going to have to work hard.
Eric brings up a good point. If Bill Gothard had kids or a wife, it would have been hell. So small mercies. Good point.
That's true.
Wow.
Now, you may have heard me mention a book earlier called How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. That wasn't random. And one of the core reasons I wanted to bring this into the story of Professor Harold Hill was because the more I look into cults like IBLP, Scientology, and all the ones I mentioned earlier, the more I notice that all of them seem to have a single through line of they're basically selling you something. And all the tactics they use to get you involved are sales tactics, like
Yeah,
we
like
see in real
MLMs.
life.
Mhm.
Exactly, like MLMs. And I'm not saying that sales in and of itself is a bad thing. Sometimes people sell very useful products and have to, convince you to get them and everything and tell you why theirs is the best. That's just how things are. But when cults use them and high controlling religions use them, the consequences can be deadly because these tactics work. The reason that cults use these tactics is because they have been proven over and over to work in so many different arenas. Bill Gothard himself endorsed this book. Bill Gothard,
Did. Oh, no. I was
yes,
afraid you were gonna say that.
Bill Gothard actually, uh, by the testimony of many people on Recovering Grace, which is the website that documented all of the abuses of IBLP, many people in the comments kept mentioning over and over that Bill Gothard had recommended this book in particular as a life-changing book or something that affected his life going forward. And so I went looking for any official IBLP recommendations for this book, and I found it almost right away. The very second wisdom booklet in our homeschooling curriculum actually endorsed this book as one of their supplementary materials. It
No.
is my belief that all of Bill Gothard's playbook is contained in this book, and I believe that there are so many parallels to other cults that is worth noting that basically, all cults are sales. Everything that I mentioned earlier, the enthusiasm, creating confidence, showing people what they want, arousing fear, exploding dynamite, and assuming a close are captions and headers in this particular book. And these are all tactics that Bill Gothard used. And these are all
Man.
tactics that Harold Hill demonstrated in his song. So if you
Wow.
leave this talk with no other key point, go away with this. Cults use tried and true sales tactics to turn you from a prospect into a product. All of these tactics are there to bring you in so that they can exploit you, your labor, your money, and make you a perpetual product while they pretend like they are giving you benefit. And that is how you can, tell a cult. Now you may be asking, well, why tie it all to Harold Hill? Why didn't you just leave with the book? Because books in and of themselves, I mean, come on, that's very academic and boring. At least with Harold Hill, the next time you see these tactics being used against you by someone who just happens to have this great spiritual thing they need to tell you about, you can spell trouble with a capital T and that rhymes with P and that stands rhymes with C and that stands for cult. I screwed it up, but you get it.
Yes, that's awesome. The comparison is awesome. The topic is terrible. The topic is Jeff. So people in the comments, if you have questions, we're taking your questions and I can ask Chad anything that you want to know, or if you want any like deep dive information, if you want a little bit more on anything he mentioned. So Chad, some
Yes.
people might say how to tell the difference between a group that is beneficial, right? So say maybe there's a group or a job or a club that really would be good for you to join, but whenever you find out about him, it sounds like a cult, right? Maybe they are charismatic or something like that, when in reality it might just be a cool like club to join at school. What's the main difference between a group that's trying to insidiously get you involved versus a group that might actually be good for you?
You just set me up for my last slide.
Oh, perfect.
So what I've covered today is just the bare minimum when it comes to cults and high controlling religions. I believe that a good way to know whether or not what you're in is a high controlling group or a cult or something that is going to be ultimately detrimental and is ultimately going to exploit you. One tried and true way is Dr. Stephen Hassan and his bite model. Where he talks about the different kinds of control that cults tend to exert over their members: behavioral control, information control, thought control, and emotion. All that together spells bite. A good resource for this is to check it at freedomofmind.com, where they have the full listings of the criteria for these kinds of control. If you see the group that you're in tending towards these activities and all these different kinds of controls, that's a good indication that you may be involved in something that is trying to exploit you. And if you have any doubts or any questions and you don't feel safe talking about it with your friends in the group or even in your peer groups, if they've all been replaced by these folks and everything, if you have doubts about any kind of beliefs you have, another resource that I recommend is recoveringfromreligion.org. They have a 24-hour line that you can talk to just about anyone about any doubts you may have about what you believe. And for full disclosure, I am not affiliated with any of these entities, either Freedom of Mind or Recovering from Religion. I just think that they're great resources for people who have questions about whether or not they're in a high controlling group and if they need to get out. So these are resources I recommend, and I feel like there are some people in the comments too that might have some ideas. But yes, definitely look at what the people who are in, what they are, how much they are controlled, what they're allowed to talk about, what they're not.
Right. Absolutely. Somebody says cults and MLMs seems to use a similar playbook. Did you notice that the others in your brand of cult also fell for MLMs? Yep.
100%. And, even a lot of people who are finding their way out of cults when they're trying to find ways to make a living and stuff are typically drawn into MLMs. And I have a lot of friends personally who have their own horror stories about that. A good resource on that is my friend Roberta Blevins, who was in the Lularich documentary. She has a podcast called Life After MLM. And she actually talks a lot about the crossover between cults and MLMs because, again, these same sales tactics are used in multi-level marketing schemes. And the life-changing promises that they make to you can be found in a lot of the cults that recruit as well.
Yeah, and if you're interested in learning a little bit more about clubs and groups that are non-religious cults, I actually did a video. It's on my YouTube right now. It's not that far back in the episodes with Dr. Jack Wathy, who will be back this weekend to talk about another type of cult, Trumpism. But we talked about non-religious cults and how many times people who fall for religious cults, once they leave that cult, they think, I'm never going to be a part of a cult again. I've learned my lesson. When in reality, that's one of their most vulnerable times to be sucked back into a different type of cult because they've lost their family, their circle, their friends. They don't have leadership. And so Dr. Jack Wathy knows a lot about cults. And so I highly recommend looking up his work as well because he's very enthusiastic about studying cults. So he's the right kind of enthusiastic. He's the proper kind.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so
by the way, can I just say too that this is especially for people who identify as skeptics and everything who are attending these sessions, which you've done an excellent job of presenting so far. Never think that you're above this. Like these tactics work because they appeal to the very workings of our brain, and any skeptic can fall victim to anything, and critical thinking, sometimes you will inevitably put your critical thinking on hold and one of these could sneak in. Don't beat yourself up about it. Cons, one of my favorite quotes was from a magician, Brian Brushwood. Cons don't fool us because we're stupid. They fool us because we're human.
Right.
And
I'm so glad you said that because something else I feel like that impacts people is when they finally get out of these groups, whether it's cults, whether it's abusive relationships, whether it's these toxic clubs, they feel so stupid. They look back and they, hindsight is 2020, right? And they see every red flag that popped up along the way that they didn't see before. And instead of saying, yeah, I spent, 15 years as part of this, but at least I didn't spend 16. I'm glad I'm out. Instead, they say, I can't believe I wasted all this time. I wasted all this energy. I was so stupid. I was such an idiot. And you're not. Because like you said, these things are developed to feed into your evolutionary ability to become attracted to them. It's the equivalent of what the chemicals they put in fast food to make you hooked on it, right? These were developed specifically to trick you and to keep you involved and to take away your autonomy and get you really excited about what you have no idea is using you. So I'm so glad you said that because I just absolutely hate it when people do the best thing for them and they escape or they get out or they disconnect themselves and they feel bad when they should be celebrating.
Well, part of the reason why I wanted to do this talk was because one of the number one questions I keep getting after Shiny Happy People was, how could anyone have fallen for that? And that's why I wanted to bring these techniques front and center, because I'm like,
Right.
because, you know, getting you in how they do it works, you know?
Right. Right. And in situations like yours, you were literally born into it.
Right.
From day one, you were told that's how things work. Why would you question that? Like, if
Mhm.
anything, I would think it would be stranger if you did question that. And then this person says, assuming skepticism and critical thinking skills were not taught in your homeschool curriculum, what helped you learn them anyways?
That's
Good
a good
question.
question.
That is.
I would say first and foremost therapy. Like I started seeing a counselor right about the time I started. You know, when the cognitive dissonance got too loud, I started saying I need help,
Yeah.
and so I started seeing a counselor who started like walking me through objectively what I believed, why I believed it, where it came from. I think one of the most beneficial things she ever told me was, whenever you hear, you know, these critiques of yourself, or whenever you hear like these thought stopping things, you know, that keep you from going any further down a trail, ask yourself, whose voice am I hearing this in? Is it your
Oh,
parents? Is it Gothard? You know, and that
interesting.
was one of the things that help start unlock, you know, the rote thought stopping things that I had in my head. I also started listening to podcasts. I know, well, resources like this are, if God, if I had you and, you know, all of your guests and everything back when I was deconstructing, I feel like I would have been much further ahead earlier.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but yes, podcasts like you know, the ones from Puzzle and Thunderstorm, and of course I listened to you know, Seth Andrews, and I hate listening to Matt Dillahunty when I was still in, you know, things like that. Just really helped me kind of like, by allowing myself to consider the merits of what they were saying, that started, you know, getting me into critical thinking. And
Right.
I am here to say I am not a genius. I am not as educated as all the people I just said, but I do feel like, you know, every day I strive to, you know, deconstruct more and more. It's a lifelong process. And, you know, if you're in that situation, be gentle with yourself. It really goes a long
Totally.
way.
Yes. Yes. And I would also wonder if exploring anything that only that group told you to avoid, find out why it was they didn't want you to, right? Because, for example, smoking. You can Google doctors tell you not to smoke, right? Insurance companies tell you not to smoke. Like lots of different places tell you not to smoke. So if your parents are like, hey, don't smoke, it makes sense because you can find that all over the place. But if only your church is telling you not to read this, not to listen to this, not to seek this out, I wonder why that is, right? I wonder
Mhm.
why only your group, and they're going to tell you it's because we're the best ones. We're the best behaved. We're the only ones saying this because we're the only ones telling you the truth. But like when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons. And everybody watched The Simpsons. And now I watch The Simpsons and it's a freaking funny show. It is so
Right?
funny. It's a good show. There's nothing wrong with it. It should have been a red flag that only I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons, right? Well, I know why. It's because my brother would quote shows in places that was inappropriate too. I found out later. But like Ren
Mhm.
and Stimpy couldn't watch it. Beavis and Butthead couldn't watch it. But if everyone that tells you to avoid certain podcasts, certain books, certain influence is only in your cult or your group or your church or your community and nobody else is telling you to avoid that, isn't that interesting? And maybe you explore the thing and you hate it. Maybe you explore it and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have watched that movie. It was just a bad movie, right? Okay, fine. But maybe you'll explore these things and find ideas or questions or thoughts that when you hear them, you recognize would not be allowed in the group that you're a part of. If you say to yourself, the number of people who reach out to me and they tell me, I can't subscribe to your Spotify because I can't have it show up on my phone, but I want you
Ooh,
to know I listen to every episode. I've been told that
wow.
at least 3 or 4 different times. And if you look at a resource and the only trouble you'd be in for accessing that resource is with your group, maybe there's something there, right? Maybe there's something. Now, if it's also illegal, like if it's also something you shouldn't be downloading, and I think we all know what I'm talking about, avoid that stuff. But just think about that. Think about the picture in your mind who all would have an issue with you exploring these resources. Because I'll tell you, a genuine person would want you to go explore these questions and thoughts and ideas that you have, and then come back and talk to you about it. Like, say, is just a pastor at your church. That person should want you to ask questions and get curious and wonder things and ask things and have questions. That person should encourage that. If that person squashes every attempt to learn something different, interesting.
Well said.
Thank you. Thank you. I did not pay him to say that, nor did he pay me to set up his last slide. And I want to give a shout out to my friends, Mind Gap Podcast. Super
Aw.
awesome podcast. It doesn't have anything to do with deconstruction. They covered pretty much a little bit of everything. Mind Gap is like the longest running podcast I've ever known personally. I highly recommend going and checking out their content. Really talented guys.
I will.
I've known them since ages ago. Probably over 10 years at this point.
Aw.
But Chad, this has been a really fantastic presentation. This is the last slide, right? I don't want to interrupt your.
Yep, you're
Okay,
good.
perfect. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your persistence. I love your persistence. You told me the day that I met you that you were never gonna stop talking about this and drawing attention to it, and you haven't. But you've stayed persistent, consistent, creative, and just immaculate, just immaculate. So thank you so much for your work and always just diving in head first and always being willing to share and to create and to talk and to just really push this necessary information out for people. You're really doing, I was going to say you're doing the Lord's work, but you're really doing some great work.
Lord Vader's work. How about that? Yeah.
Lord Byron's work.
Oh, Byron.
If you have any final thoughts, or where can we find you? Where can we see more of your work? If people just really enjoyed what you had to say today, where can we find you? What are you about?
Oh, you can find me pretty much everywhere on the internet. So you can find Archradish. That's, it's not a big secret. It's Chad Harris mixed up, basically. But yeah, I'm mostly on TikTok. I'm also every once in a while on Threads, on Instagram, on Reddit. Pretty much, anytime you see Archradish, it's probably me. So yeah, reach out, say hi. I am not shy.
Yeah.
But Sydney, in echo of what you said about thanking me for my persistence, thank you for providing a platform for people to get out this necessary information, and thank you for letting me. This is now what, the third, fourth time and everything present. Present all this information about the cult. I hope that all of you have learned something from it, and I sincerely hope, if you haven't already, please subscribe to Sydney. She just puts out amazing content on the daily for this, so thank you.
Thank you so much. And for those of you in the chat, after this, within the next couple of minutes, another episode of Growing Up Fundy is debuting tonight. It's going to be like a live premiere. I think I scheduled it for 8:15, I believe. And there is a guest on it named Tim, who is Catholic, and the topic of our discussion that we had was, just because you're religious doesn't mean you agree with everything. And I thought it was a very interesting perspective on how being religious doesn't necessarily mean you agree with every single solitary thing you're told in church, and he goes into detail about that. So if you got a couple of hours, that's coming up at 8:15. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, everybody in the chat. Thank you, Mind Gap Podcast, String Theories, Time Waster, everybody who's there in the chat hanging out with us. And we will see you tomorrow.